June 6, 1944, 0300 hours, only 3.5 hours remained before the assault on Omaha Beach. The immense Allied armada sat motionless upon the dark waters. Across rain-slick decks, soldiers prepared themselves for what would become the largest amphibious invasion in human history. Men glanced silently at those beside them, fully aware that before nightfall many of their comrades would lie lifeless across the bloody sands of Normandy. The ships pitched against rough seas. Forecasts had promised calm winds and steady water, yet the channel churned violently as though warning of the chaos to come. But the approaching storm would not bring thunder or rain. It would arrive in the form of artillery fire, machine gun bursts, and endless explosions. Officers barked commands through the cold night air while troops climbed into their landing craft. Rifles were gripped like lifelines. Some men whispered prayers under their breath, others pictured wives, parents, and children waiting back home in America. Their mission was simple in words and terrifying in reality: seize Omaha Beach at any cost. Without a foothold in France, defeating Nazi Germany would be impossible. The men packed tightly into the landing vessels as they were lowered into the black waters of the English Channel. Inside the Higgins boats, the sounds of nervous breathing mixed with vomiting caused by violent seasickness. The craft circled in formation around the fleet, waiting until every vessel was prepared before charging toward France together. Far overhead, Royal Air Force bombers thundered across the sky, dropping explosives onto defensive positions scattered along the Normandy coastline. Engines roared louder as the landing craft accelerated. The invasion of Omaha Beach was about to begin. 0455 hours, 1 hour and 35 minutes before the landing. Sea spray slammed into the faces of American soldiers crammed shoulder to shoulder inside the Higgins boats as they pushed toward shore. Unexpectedly powerful currents dragged the craft away from their assigned routes. Helmsmen fought desperately to regain control, but the tide continued to pull them off target. If the boats landed in the wrong sectors, German defenses would tear the invasion force apart before it ever established a beachhead. 0550 hours, 40 minutes until the assault. The deafening roar of naval artillery rolled across the channel as Allied warships unleashed a relentless bombardment on German positions overlooking Omaha Beach. Smoke and low clouds obscured visibility, making it nearly impossible to judge the effectiveness of the shelling, yet the fleet continued firing without pause. Massive shells smashed into bunkers and concrete fortifications while rockets detonated ammunition depots along the coast. Craters scarred the landscape as the barrage intensified. German batteries answered from the shoreline, though darkness concealed most of the fleet. From land, only bright flashes from naval guns were visible through the haze. 64 DD amphibious tanks advanced through the rough water toward the beach. Soldiers in the landing craft watched them pass with hopeful smiles, believing the armored vehicles would provide critical support once the assault began. But the sea proved too violent. Several thousand yards from shore, the tanks began disappearing beneath the waves. Infantrymen stared in horror as one vehicle after another vanished into the freezing channel. Then the Higgins boats themselves started taking on water. Soldiers removed their helmets and frantically scooped water overboard in an effort to keep their craft afloat. The invasion had not even started, and already the operation was unraveling. It was an ominous sign for what lay ahead. 0630 hours, the attack on Omaha Beach commenced. The landing craft halted short of shore. Underwater obstacles, wreckage, and steel anti-landing barriers blocked the approach, forcing troops to disembark farther from land than planned. Explosions erupted constantly around the landing zones as German artillery and mortars hammered the coastline. One shell struck a landing craft directly, obliterating it in an instant. Twisted metal, shattered wood, and mangled human remains rained into the air. Officers shouted desperately to steady their terrified men while the signal came to lower the ramps. Metal groaned loudly before the ramps slammed downward, exposing the soldiers to the open beach ahead. The instant those ramps dropped, slaughter erupted. German machine gunners hidden inside fortified pillboxes had waited for this exact moment. Streams of bullets tore through entire units before many soldiers could even step into the water. Some landing craft became floating tombs, their floors covered with dead Americans. Others drifted aimlessly while bodies floated beside them in blood-red surf. Yet despite the carnage, some men reached shore. They would fight. They would carry out their orders. And they would seize Omaha Beach. March 1943, 1 year and 3 months before D-Day. Lieutenant General Frederick Morgan of the British Army sat alone in a dim office, sketching invasion concepts across scattered papers. His trash bin overflowed with rejected plans. Allied commanders understood that victory over Nazi Germany required a return to mainland Europe through France. Once established there, British and American forces could join with the French resistance and pressure Hitler's western defenses while Soviet armies advanced from the east. Yet crossing the English Channel and invading occupied France seemed almost impossible. Morgan rubbed his tired eyes and swallowed another mouthful of whiskey. Exhaustion consumed him, he had barely slept for days. The burden of planning an invasion weighed heavily on him after being named Chief of Staff to the yet-to-be-appointed Supreme Allied Commander. For weeks he and other Allied strategists had debated countless options, but none seemed truly workable. Slumping back in his chair, Morgan pulled an older invasion proposal from a desk drawer and stared at it once more. Maybe this flawed idea was still the best chance they had. Quietly, he wondered whether history would punish him for it. August 1943, 1 year and 2 months before Omaha Beach. Allied leaders gathered in Canada for the First Quebec Conference, codenamed Quadrant. A senior officer stood before the assembled commanders and political leaders, presenting Morgan's proposed invasion strategy. Winston Churchill, Franklin D. Roosevelt, and Canadian Prime Minister William Lyon Mackenzie King listened carefully before nodding in agreement. Numerous concepts had been discussed during the conference, but Morgan's plan appeared to offer the strongest possibility of success. Debate continued, yet by the conclusion of the meetings the Allies accepted that this strategy represented their best opportunity to return to France. November 21, 1943, 7 months before Omaha Beach. A conference of Germany's armed forces high command was about to begin. Outside, crowds cheered enthusiastically and shouted, "Sieg Heil," beneath Nazi banners. Germany controlled much of Europe, and nationalist fervor consumed the population. Many citizens were aware of the horrors occurring in concentration camps, yet Hitler's promises of triumph and glory kept support strong among those convinced Germany was destined to dominate Europe and establish an Aryan empire. Field Marshal Rommel, Adolf Hitler announced to the gathered officers, "Your accomplishments during the invasion of France proved your strategic brilliance. I am assigning you responsibility for strengthening our defenses along the French coast." Erwin Rommel, the famed Desert Fox, inclined his head respectfully. "The Allies will never set foot on French soil, mein Führer." Rommel immediately envisioned vast minefields, expanded beach obstacles, and new fortified bunkers lining the Normandy coast. Should Allied forces attempt a landing, he intended for them to be annihilated before securing a foothold. Determination burned in his eyes as he imagined crushing any invasion attempt and forcing the enemy into surrender. December 31, 1943, 6 months before the landings. Allied soldiers plunged into the icy waters of the English Channel during training exercises. Officers shouted relentlessly from the shore. "Keep moving. The Germans won't care if the water's freezing." Thousands of troops rehearsed amphibious assaults while boat crews practiced landing maneuvers. British and American generals observed from Slapton Sands as soldiers repeated drills day after day in preparation for D-Day. One commander frowned while watching heavily burdened men disappear beneath the surface. "They're carrying too much equipment," he warned. "They sink like stones." The exercises revealed countless problems requiring solutions. Preparing an army for such an operation would demand months of refinement. Again and again the troops repeated the training. Each mistake led to adjustments, and every new issue forced further revisions. Failure during these rehearsals could mean canceling the invasion entirely. January 1944. Under cover of darkness, a midget submarine surfaced near the Normandy coast. Its mission was critical to Operation Overlord. 2 men studied Omaha Beach through binoculars while distant German patrol lights moved along the cliffs. Capture would mean torture and possible exposure of Allied plans, so the operatives had been ordered never to fall alive into enemy hands. "I'm going in," one whispered before slipping into the freezing water. His companion kept watch from the submarine as the swimmer approached shore. Reaching shallow water, the soldier crept onto the beach carrying a small container. He needed samples of the sand for Allied engineers. Kneeling near the tide line, he filled the jar while scanning the darkness around him. Suddenly clouds shifted, and moonlight briefly illuminated him in the open. Time to leave. He secured the lid, but movement nearby froze him in place. Flattening himself against the sand, he remained perfectly still as 2 German soldiers descended a rocky slope onto the beach. One struck a match and lit a cigarette. The pair leaned against the cliff and talked casually while the Allied operative lay motionless only yards away. Minutes felt like hours. Eventually the cigarette burned out, and the Germans climbed back toward their defensive trenches. The soldier finally exhaled in relief. Staying low, he crawled back to the water, swam toward the submarine, and was hauled aboard by his comrade. "That was too close," the other man muttered. Inside the vessel, the operative labeled the jar Omaha Beach and placed it beside others marked Utah, Gold, Juno, and Sword. Allied scientists would analyze the sand to determine whether tanks and heavy equipment could move across the beaches during the invasion. March 1944, 3 months before Omaha Beach. Allied bombers roared across French skies. "Target identified," a pilot reported. "Commence bombing run." Air raid sirens echoed below as German troops rushed toward anti-aircraft batteries. Explosions illuminated the darkness while tracer rounds streaked upward. Some Allied aircraft were struck and spiraled toward the ground in flames. "We're over the target area. Release bombs." Bomb bay doors opened, and enormous payloads crashed onto railways and train yards across occupied France. The mission aimed to cripple German transportation networks and prevent reinforcements from reaching the coast. Nazi leaders realized the Allies were preparing something significant, but they still could not determine where the invasion would occur. Luftwaffe fighters rose to intercept the bombers, igniting violent dogfights across the skies. Allied escorts fought desperately to protect the retreating bombers. Aircraft from both sides exploded in midair or plummeted to earth. Pilots fortunate enough to parachute safely often faced another challenge: avoiding capture by German forces. Many hid in forests or sought refuge with the French resistance while awaiting the coming invasion. April 7, 1944, 2 months before Omaha Beach. General Bernard Montgomery presented final modifications to Operation Overlord before Churchill and Allied commanders. "Each landing beach presents unique problems," Montgomery explained, "but Omaha will be especially dangerous." Concern spread among the leadership. Additional preparation was clearly necessary. Meanwhile, the Royal Navy deployed mines throughout the English Channel near German naval bases to hinder fast-moving E-boats that might attack the invasion fleet. Allied command feared that even if troops reached shore successfully, German torpedo boats could destroy transports before heavy equipment and reinforcements unloaded onto the beaches. May 2, 1944, 1 month and 4 days before the landings. Exercise Fabius, the largest rehearsal for Operation Overlord, unfolded along southern England's coastline. 25,000 troops boarded landing craft to perfect deployment procedures in what would become the final major training exercise before D-Day itself. Yet no rehearsal could truly prepare them for the slaughter awaiting them in France. Originally, Allied leaders hoped to invade on May 1, but delays in equipment deliveries and shortages of landing craft forced postponement. Commanders studied tidal conditions and moon phases carefully. The invasion required low tides and bright moonlight for nighttime operations. Two possible windows fit the criteria: June 5 to 7 and June 18 to 20. The sooner the attack launched, the better, provided weather conditions cooperated. Late May 1944. Allied troops remained confined within camps across southern England. Though not prisoners, many felt trapped. They were forbidden from leaving and prohibited from communicating with the outside world. Allied leaders feared that intercepted information or enemy spies could expose the invasion plan and doom the war effort. Everyone now understood that the invasion of France was approaching rapidly. Excitement mixed with dread among the soldiers. They longed to liberate Europe from Nazi control, yet knew countless men would die. Between card games and cigarettes, they spoke quietly about families waiting back home. At naval facilities, engineers waterproofed vehicles and supplies to ensure they would function once ashore. Only during the final days of May did most troops receive their detailed D-Day orders, and even then many soldiers knew only what they absolutely needed to know. May 31, 1944, 6 days before Omaha Beach. "Grab your gear and get aboard," commanders shouted as troops marched toward ships waiting along the English coast. The invasion force was so massive that loading the fleet required 5 full days. Soldiers boarding first would remain trapped in cramped conditions until every vessel was ready to sail. Miserable though it was, the process was necessary to ensure the invasion departed on schedule. June 1, 1944, 5 days before Omaha Beach. The BBC broadcast the opening lines of Paul Verlaine's poem Chanson d'automne across occupied Europe. A French resistance operator ripped off his headset and sprinted through a rundown building before bursting into a hidden meeting room. "Sir! The poem is on the radio. The invasion is coming." Resistance leaders leapt from their seats and rushed to hear the transmission themselves. Orders spread quickly throughout the underground network. Across France, resistance fighters prepared sabotage operations against German infrastructure. In Berlin, a Nazi intelligence officer reported the message directly to Hitler. "We believe the poem contains instructions for the French resistance, Mein Führer." Hitler studied the lines with growing anger. "What does it mean?" "We cannot say for certain," the officer admitted nervously. "Some suspect it signals an imminent Allied invasion." Furious, Hitler crushed the paper in his fist. "Find out immediately," he screamed. "If the Allies are preparing to attack, I want answers now." Throughout occupied France, resistance cells emerged from hiding to sabotage railways, destroy supply depots, and disrupt German troop movements. They did not know the exact invasion date, only that the coded poem meant the assault would begin within weeks. June 3, 1944, 3 days before Omaha Beach. Group Captain James Stagg examined weather reports from across the channel. The invasion was scheduled for June 5, but the forecast looked disastrous. He informed Allied command that proceeding would be a grave mistake. "What do you mean we can't launch?" one furious general demanded. "The seas are too dangerous," Stagg replied. Landing craft could capsize or collide with each other. Tension filled the room as commanders argued. Churchill finally suggested waiting another day to see whether conditions improved. Stagg continued monitoring the weather carefully. June 4, 1944, 2 days before Omaha Beach. "Conditions are still unacceptable," Stagg warned. "The invasion must be delayed." Eisenhower reluctantly ordered the fleet recalled to English harbors. Later that day, chaos erupted when an officer burst into headquarters carrying shocking news. The Associated Press had accidentally announced that the invasion of France had already begun. Churchill exploded with rage. Within minutes, the false report was withdrawn after officials discovered that a teletype operator had mistakenly transmitted a practice message worldwide, including to Germany. Allied leaders now feared the Germans would reinforce Normandy if given more time. The invasion could not be postponed much longer. June 5, 1944, 0415 hours, 1 day before Omaha Beach. Eisenhower made the final decision. The weather tomorrow appears favorable. Operation Overlord launches on June 6, open the sealed orders. There is no turning back now. Across the invasion force, envelopes were opened and officers revealed the details of their assigned landing zones. 0600 hours, the first Allied ships departed English ports and entered the Channel. The slowest vessels sailed first to ensure the enormous fleet assembled on time. 2300 hours, aircraft engines roared to life across England. Transport planes carrying American and British airborne troops lifted into the night sky. Paratroopers and glider forces would land behind enemy lines to secure key objectives inland before linking up with the invasion beaches. Both air crews and sailors prayed the Germans would not detect them before they reached their positions. Fortunately, the Allied forces slipped into place unnoticed. June 6, 1944, 0000 hours, 6.5 hours before Omaha Beach. Minesweepers moved ahead of the main fleet, clearing safe paths through the Channel. Clouds drifted overhead, though moonlight occasionally broke through the haze as the invasion armada advanced toward France. 0300 hours, 3.5 hours before Omaha Beach. Landing craft splashed into the sea and began moving toward shore. Officers offered final words of encouragement to American troops preparing for the nightmare ahead. 0630 hours, Omaha Beach erupted into chaos. Every company from the 1st and 29th Infantry Divisions had drifted east of their assigned sectors. Original plans no longer mattered. Amid exploding shells and relentless machine gun fire, every soldier had to adapt instantly or die. German defenses devastated the invasion force. From the heights of Point du Hoc, German observers commanded a perfect view of the entire battlefield. Lieutenant Colonel James Rudder led the 2nd and 5th Ranger Battalions with orders to eliminate the German positions overlooking Omaha. Under intense fire, the Rangers approached shore knowing failure could doom the entire beachhead. The first wave struggled through waist-deep water toward land. With no cover available, countless men were cut down before reaching the sand. Survivors crawled toward a stone seawall hundreds of yards inland. It offered little protection, yet it was all they had. German guns never stopped firing. Each arriving landing craft brought fresh slaughter as ramps lowered and soldiers were ripped apart by bullets, explosions, or drowning beneath the surf. Yet those who reached the seawall began organizing counterattacks against the German defenses. 0700 hours, 30 minutes after the landing. Troops sheltering behind the seawall attempted to push toward the ridges above the beach. Delayed landing craft finally arrived, delivering more soldiers into the killing zone. Many cut away heavy equipment with knives to avoid drowning beneath the waves. German veterans of the 352nd Infantry Division maintained devastating fire across Omaha Beach. At Point du Hoc, Rudder's Rangers finally reached shore and began scaling the cliffs beneath enemy fire. Crawling through barbed wire and minefields, the 2nd Rangers climbed toward the summit while the 5th Battalion waited for a signal before advancing. If the assault failed, Omaha Beach itself might collapse. Reaching the top, the Rangers encountered fierce resistance. They fought from crater to crater and trench to trench, driving toward German bunkers. Wounded men continued forward despite heavy casualties. Eventually they stormed the casemates, only to discover the main guns had already been relocated inland. "We have to find those artillery pieces," Rudder shouted. Small Ranger teams spread out searching the countryside. One patrol followed a dirt road behind Point du Hoc and heard German voices alongside the boom of artillery. Creeping closer, they discovered heavy guns aimed toward Utah Beach. Without time to report back, one Ranger produced thermite grenades. On 3. The grenades detonated beside the artillery, melting critical components and rendering the weapons useless. The Rangers then opened fire on nearby German crews before withdrawing to rejoin their unit. Because locating the guns had taken too long, the 5th Rangers eventually joined the fighting directly on Omaha Beach. They stormed trenches and battled German defenders in brutal close combat using pistols, knives, and rifle butts. Slowly, the Americans secured portions of the ridge overlooking the shore. 0800 hours, 90 minutes after the landing. Despite Ranger successes on the western flank, most American troops remained pinned down near the waterline. 11 destroyers moved dangerously close to shore to provide direct naval fire support. Their shells smashed German strongpoints while officers on the beach rallied scattered troops to advance. One leader, recently only a private after his superiors had been killed, gathered soldiers behind the seawall and led them toward the cliffs. German bullets shattered rocks around them as they crossed exposed ground. Reaching the base of a ridge, the new commander spotted a machine gun nest above them. He ordered covering fire, sprinted forward, and hurled a grenade into the position. Moments later the nest exploded. "Move," he shouted. The soldiers climbed cautiously upward. Mines littered the slope, forcing the commander to lead carefully while marking a safe path behind them with tape. Firefights erupted repeatedly as Germans hidden along the cliffs attempted to stop the ascent. 1100 hours, 4.5 hours after the invasion began. American troops finally reached the top of the ridge and attacked the German defenses from above. Pillboxes, bunkers, and gun emplacements gradually fell one by one as more soldiers followed the marked path up the cliffs. Some German defenders surrendered after realizing the Americans had breached their lines, while others fought to the death. Though the Allies gained ground, their casualties far exceeded those of the defenders. 1200 hours, 5.5 hours after the landings. German artillery still fired intermittently, but its intensity had weakened considerably. Between the Rangers at Point du Hoc and the surviving infantrymen who crossed Omaha Beach, Allied forces slowly advanced toward their objectives. Landing craft carrying tanks and vehicles finally approached the shore while engineers worked tirelessly under fire to clear beach obstacles. These engineers had remained exposed in the killing zone for hours dismantling German defenses so reinforcements could land safely. Like the infantry, they suffered terrible losses. 2000 hours, 13.5 hours after the invasion began. American forces had cleared the road to St. Laurent and secured nearly the entire ridgeline overlooking Omaha Beach. From those heights, soldiers watched hundreds of Allied vessels approaching the now open beaches below. After the horror endured throughout the day, the sight felt almost unreal. Beyond the shoreline, troops moved inland to clear nearby towns of remaining German resistance. Yet many major objectives remained unsecured, and nobody could have predicted how badly parts of Operation Overlord would go wrong. Casualties at Omaha Beach proved heavier than at any other landing site in Normandy. 2400 hours, D-Day ended. The Allies had established a foothold in France, though they had advanced barely 1 mile inland. Only some of Omaha Beach's objectives had been achieved. Reinforcements, vehicles, and supplies continued pouring ashore throughout the night. At Point du Hoc, the surviving Rangers had destroyed or captured all long-range coastal artillery and held off German counterattacks for the entire day. Of the 225 Rangers who climbed the cliffs that morning, only 90 remained alive. The true number of dead at Omaha Beach would never be known. Many bodies vanished beneath the sea or were obliterated entirely by artillery fire. Roughly 34,000 Allied troops fought there on D-Day, with American casualties estimated around 2,400 men within mere hours. German losses numbered approximately 1,200. Omaha Beach had been secured, but at an enormous human cost. As dawn rose over Normandy on June 7, one truth had become undeniable: Operation Overlord had succeeded, yet the war itself was far from over.